Hello everyone, welcome to VizConnect, connecting you with the art of data visualization and storytelling. My name is Sagar Kapoor. I'm part of customer success team at Tableau. So all our VizConnect sessions are uploaded to our YouTube page. Go ahead, subscribe to it. Some great content waiting for you. We have a LinkedIn group. Go ahead, connect with each other and learn from each other. With that, let me introduce you to our speaker for today. So Simon is a two-times Zen Master, social media ambassador, and 2020 IronWest finalist. He started using Tableau in 2015 and now leads a vibrant and innovative BI Center of Enablement at JLL, a market-leading corporate real estate company. In his spare time, Simon has a passion for sports. As co-host of the community initiative hashtag Sports with Sunday, he regularly visits about sports on his Tableau public profile. It's fair to say that he is a lot more successful at raising sports than playing it. So without further ado, I will hand it over to Simon to talk about small design choice that make a big difference. Simon, over to you.
Thank you, Sagar. So if you could just confirm when you can see my screen, so we'll get all the technical stuff done.
I can see your screen, Simon. Yeah, you're good to go.
Thank you. So welcome everyone. Thank you for taking the time to join me today. So I'm going to be talking through something that's quite passionate to me in my Tableau journey. So small design choices that can make a big difference to your overall design. I think what I've learned over my 5 years of Tableau experience, starting from not knowing what Tableau was all the way through to being a Zen, of which something I'm very proud and grateful for today, is that you can make even the simplest chart beautiful by just removing ink and increasing the interactivity and engagement you get by reducing the complexity for your end user. So a lot of the techniques I'll be sharing with you today aren't necessarily going to be the most complex, but I honestly believe they will make a great difference to your engagement on your dashboards. So the content I'm going to be sharing with you, you will notice it is built in Tableau, so it will be uploaded to my Tableau public profile later, so you'll be able to download it all and see all the choices for yourself. So just a quick introduction to myself. I thank you, Sagar, for the very kind and generous welcome. I am a 2 times Tableau Zen Master. I'm very proud to be so, and also Tableau's social media ambassador. This year I had the honour, and I think it was a slight fight when I was first announced in terms of being a 2020 IronViz finalist, and a massive congratulations to Christian for the success on winning it this year. As was said, I am the co-lead of Sports Viz Sunday, which is a community initiative to connect people that have got a love of data and sports. And from a professional side, I am desktop certified professional, and I would encourage anyone that uses Tableau in their professional environments to explore Tableau certification. I think it's a great way of getting your skills recognised and getting your sense of achievement recognised by your industry and your colleagues. And in work, I lead JLL's Global BI Centre of Enablement. So I thought before I start, I just wanted to give a quick hat tip to Autumn Batani. So Autumn recently has started a community initiative to showcase your Tableau Public portfolio. And Tableau Public is where my passion is when it comes to Tableau. I love what I do at work, but there is no doubt when I get home and I can viz, that's when I'm in my sweet spot. So a hat tip to Autumn and a shout out to Autumn. I thought when I introduced my Tableau Public portfolio, I would do it from the concept of my first public viz, which was the Makeover Monday, I think I did in 2016, involving the Panda. It's fair to say on the top left, it's probably not my finest piece of work, but that's where I started. And none of us should be ashamed with our first viz. We all start somewhere. And I would actively encourage people to keep their first viz on Tableau Public, because it's a great way of promoting your growth and how your skills have evolved. Top right is my most recent viz. Had to be a sports one, so that was relating to the Masters for wire-to-wire winners. Bottom left is my favourite viz, and the reason that's a favourite is that was the most recent viz I did as a collaboration with Lorna Brown and Sam Parsons. And both of those inspired me with creativity when it came to data collection and design choices, and that really pushed me way beyond the boundaries of what I'd normally design. So being able to join together and create a joint viz, a massive shout out to Sam, because a lot of those viz techniques you see in that viz are his. But yeah, it was an absolute inspiration doing it together. And the viz I would do differently is the one in the bottom right, celebrating Lewis Hamilton in the 2008 season for F1. Whilst it does share the insights, I think it's quite clunky and cumbersome in terms of its design, so I'd like to make it far more elegant now if I redid that 2 years later. And just before I start to share with you the themes and the techniques today, I just wanted to give a shout out to two people that have really inspired a lot of the design thinking that I share today. These two people, so Ryan Sleeper and Cole Nausbaner-Naflik, have been inspirational in my career. Both of those I admire tremendously for their simple techniques to make charts beautiful and make charts engaging. And a lot of their techniques aren't complex. A lot of them actually aren't specific to Tableau, but what they do is absolutely exceptional. And I'd encourage anyone to check out their websites that I share on screen here if you want some examples of how to simplify charts to increase engagement. So let's get into Tableau. So today I'll be sharing some small design choices. So how to increase white space, minimize axis, customize labels and ordering, and stylize scatters. And it was inspired by my 2020 Iron Viz feeder viz relating to the Human Development Index, which I did back in the summer and was fortunate enough to get in the top 3 to get into the final. So a lot of the techniques use the same charts in that, so you'll actually be able to go into the viz and see it in full for yourself, open the viz up and reverse engineer any of the things that I'll be sharing today. So let's jump into the first one. How do you increase white space on the viz? And why do you want to? So that chart on the right-hand side, you might argue, you know what, it's formatted relatively well. You can see the 0 to 100, you can see the scale, you can see the left-hand side, the dimensions. But I would argue there's an awful lot of ink on the screen. There's an awful lot of intensity of color. There's not a particular amount of white space when it comes, or blank space, should I say, in this instance, because it's not a white background. But there's not a lot of gap around the chart. So you're not giving the chart room to breathe. And I guess that's the fundamental concept that I want to take us through. So let's start with the easiest thing we can do. Let's reduce the bar height. So simply, all I'm doing there, so let me just go into the sheet, is simply going into the bar mark and I'm just taking it down to the midpoint. So what it was up around kind of the top, and as you can see the lines, and there may be instances where the bars you want to be close together, but in this instance I just want to bring them down to the midpoint, so I'm creating gaps between each row, so I'm allowing the user some chance to actually breathe and to see each row in itself. So that is the simplest technique. But then, next simple one is just adding the borders. So if you compare the previous one, yes, you can see it, but again, the colors bleed into each other. So just simply by adding the border to the segments, you will increase the visual stimulus to the end user in terms of you are segmenting each section. Now, there may be times that you don't want to do that. So if you've got particularly small sections, adding a border can sometimes make that difficult to see. So I would say that this is a particular technique I use that you may want to add some personal choice in terms of reflecting, have you got sufficient segments to be able to add the border? But certainly I would encourage you to add the segment borders. So you might be thinking, that's great, Simon, but all you've told me to do so far is reduce the bar heights and put borders on. That's not exactly rocket science. So let's get into something that's maybe a little bit more advanced. So the next stage I am suggesting to do is to remove the axes and add the labels on. So for me, in this example, when I developed my Iron Viz feeder, for the purpose of the stacked bars, I know they add up to 100, and it wasn't particularly important for me to be able to articulate to the end user, is this value 10%, is it 11%, or is it 12%? Fundamentally, all I was trying to do is strategically say that people have a higher quality of living in Europe than they do in places like Africa and some places in Oceania and Asia. So actually by doing that, I think I put myself in the end user's shoes to say, what's the level of detail that I want to articulate in my viz? And if decimal places or particular percentage points are not important, I would encourage you to hide the axes, because by showing the axes, you are inferring an importance to the detail that in reality isn't there. But when it comes to the actual score of the Human Development Index, which is a score between 0 and 1, that's the right-hand charts, I did want to show the individual value. So rather than have a axis on one and not on the other, I actually wanted to say I'm going to remove it, but then add the labels just to the right-hand side bar. So if we go into it, particularly easy to do. So let's just show the header. So I'm simply going to hide the header, but then on the right-hand side one, which is the regional score, I simply show the label, and I chose deliberately to align those to the left of the bar so that the end user can read down the entire row. I could have assigned them to the right-hand side of the bar, but I personally feel if you assign to the right, the user then has to follow down the end of the bar. And actually you'll see there a design choice that I deliberately took. The 0.7 is then overwritten by the global value. So because I was seeing visual kind of challenging of one overlaying the other, I chose a deliberate design choice to align to the left-hand side so the user can just read down instantly and they don't have to try and kind of see it going down sequentially at the end of the bars. It's a lot easier to just go down in a complete constant line than it is to go down in segments as each bar reduces. And you can, and I will share some techniques later, that if you do want to show a axis on one and not the other, reference lines are your friend in that. So I will share with you some examples of how to do that. But we wanted to start with the easy stuff first and then progress through to some of the more complex. So on this particular chart, the last design choice that I chose was to increase the gap between the row dimension header, so the region, and the first part of the bar chart. So there are a couple of ways that you can do that. So what I'm trying to do here is increase the gap between the Europe label, the Americas label, and the stacked bar. And I'm trying to increase the gap between the end of the stacked bar and where the individual human development scores are. So if I just go back to the old one, you'll see that there's the amount of data in terms of one element going into the next, they're quite close. So what I wanted to do is, again, give them room to breathe. So here's a neat trick that you can do to achieve that. So if you go and show the headers, what you'll notice is when Tableau does it automatically, it sets the header between 0 and 1.05. So that's between 0 and 100%. And that's why the left edge of the bar is very close to the Europe header. But in reality, if you fix it so that you do, say, minus 0.1 to 1.1, what you are doing is forcing Tableau to then change where the stacked bar is then plotted. So you're then actually able to be able to force Tableau to be able to create white space. So it's a nice, neat trick of being able to use. So I'm just going to undo it to go back to what it was. So it's a nice, neat trick of just editing the axes and being able to amend where Tableau starts the bar. Now I'm going to share a technique on the next instance where you can actually then remove some of these points on the axes, so you're not then showing the minus 10, which in reality isn't a genuine value. But in this instance, if you want to achieve white space, you can either do it via the use of the axes, so doing what I did there, or if you only want white space on the left-hand side, the other neat trick is just to simply add in a spacer as an additional hill, and then you'll see there that actually pads it out, and you can then change the height of that additional column that you've added in. Now, I don't want to do that in this instance because I don't need to, but if you do want a neat trick of being able to add white space between your labels and your chart, you could also pad it out like that as well. So what we've got there is white space between the labels, the stacked bar, and the normal bar. So if I just recap that, what you've got on the top chart is the before. What you've got on the bottom chart is the after. Now, my personal opinion is it's a lot easier to digest the bottom chart because of the gaps, because of the room to breathe. You're not overwhelmed by the ink, the colour, and the depth of the chart on the top. That's my personal view, and I welcome discussion. If you want to get in touch afterwards and say you disagree, you're more than welcome to, because a lot of design is personal choice. But for me personally, I find it a lot easier to digest that than I do the top left, the top chart option. So another technique that I used in my IronViz feeder was about minimizing the axes. So what you'll see on screen here is a trend chart showing the Human Development Index, where the red line is the global value and the individual lines are individual countries over time. So you've got defaults, such as Tableau's default will show you the axes, and it will show you a point in time in terms of the individual points that Tableau feel is appropriate. So it gives you a 0.1 incremental change, so a point change. On the dates, it gives you a 2-year date period change. Now, I accept, especially in the business context, there will be times that you need that level of granularity. So this next technique that I'm sharing with you may not be one that you want to necessarily always apply to business dashboards, but it is something I think when we're developing personal vizzes, where again, potentially the detail or the precision of the number is not quite so important, I think this technique is really good at, again, being able to reduce the ink and make your chart a lot more accessible. So I will start again with a really easy one. On this instance, I've just removed the grid lines. And I've removed the grid lines deliberately because I don't need people to get the detail. I just want them to be able to see the overall trend. So I'm not going to show you how to do that, because I'd imagine most people know how to go in and format the grid lines. But this is where we start to get a little bit more interesting. So what you'll see here is a design technique where I've chosen to show 2000, because that's the first point on the trend line, and 2018, which is the last point on the trend line. And on your y-axis, or your columns, I've shown 0 to 1, because that's the range of the Human Development Index. Now, this is a little bit more hidden in terms of how to do this in Tableau. So if I go into the sheet, what I've done is it's still an axis, so you'll know different there. But what I've done is, so when you go into the tick marks, and most of the time when you edit your axes, I'd imagine 99% of the time you're simply using the range option, your axis title, and potentially the reversed or log scale options. So you'll notice that this chart is still going between 1999 and 2019. So I'm still giving it a 1-year gap of white space either side the lines to allow the chart room to breathe. But this time, go into tick marks. And if you go into tick marks, one of the least used options that I see in Tableau is to set the tick marks. So again, just let me demonstrate this. So if I go to automatic, you'll see that Tableau is plotting every single year. But what you can do is go fixed. And if you go fixed, you can then specify the tick origin. So that's the first point that you want Tableau to display on your chart. So I'm choosing the year 2000. And then you've got this thing called tick interval. Now, minute tick interval is set to 10. So you'll see that Tableau is plotting on the chart 2000 and 2010. But if I set that tick interval to 18, what you're then allowing Tableau to do is, in theory, present the first year and the last year in your axes. So that's in a way of being able to minimize all of the ink of the individual years in between. So they're still in the tooltip, so when you hover over, you can still see the individual years. But again, you've just minimized all of that ink between 2000 and 2018. So when you're presenting it to the end user, They know that's the range. Is it so important for them to know each individual year? In this instance, in my feeder, no. And it's exactly the same option here, where I've fixed it. Now, in this instance, I've fixed it at minus 0.05, just to give it a little bit of gap at the bottom. And then I've put it to 1. But again, on the tick marks, it's exactly the same technique, where I fixed it from the tick origin of 0 to the tick interval of 1. So I'm forcing Tableau just to render 2 numbers on my axes. Now that works great if your chart isn't dynamic. So I'm going to come on to that in a minute. But the next thing I've done is I've embedded the axes label. So because I'm now only showing 0 to 1, I can then embed the axes label, so the human development index of what that 0 to 1 is showing. I can then embed a floating text box in between 0 and 1. So again, I'm simplifying the labels of the axes by embedding it between the 2 numbers. And again, I think that's a really nice technique just to be able to align your numbers, your axes label all the way through. And obviously, you'd never be able to do that if you were showing the individual points, and that's why Tableau automatically puts the axis label to the outside of the numbers. But if you choose this minimal axis, you would then be able to embed it inside. And again, just to stress, you're probably not going to do this on business dashboards every day, but if you're doing personal dashboards or you're doing dashboards where the precision isn't as important, this is a really nice technique to be able to simplify your design. Now, the next trick is how to make the year axis dynamic. So what happens if your range, you change the country or change the region, and all of a sudden your data didn't exist between 2000 and 2018? What happens if it existed between 2000 and 2010? You've got a problem. So the way I did it originally, I hard-coded Tableau to say I want to start at 2000 and do the interval at an 18-year period. That's going to cause you a big problem if you then have to have a dynamic axis where your date changes. So this, remember earlier, I said reference lines were your friend. So what we can now do here is actually what you'll see, so just let me reverse engineer this all the way through. So that's actually the year axis down here. I'm actually hiding that. So I'm not actually showing a genuine axis. What I'm doing is dropping a reference line on the min and a reference line on the max, and then labeling the reference lines. So it's simply a fixed level of detail. So I've just created a formula that says fixed min of year, and I've done the same for max. So I'm not going to open that up because hopefully it's fairly intuitive. But then all I've done is gone analytics and constant line, drop that on year, and then you've got one line here where the value is a minimum of the min value and the label is the value. So effectively what you're doing is you're labeling that reference line with the minimum year. And then what you'll notice is if then I drop year into the filter, and I change that to say 2015, now because it's a fixed level of detail, that's going to do nothing to the end axis. But if I then make that context, you will then notice that the axis down here all of a sudden dynamically changes. So you are then actually telling Tableau what you want the tick interval to be and the tick origin to be, because you're forcing it via a reference line and labeling the reference line. And you can do that via any chart that you want. And it's a really nice way of being able to automate the simplifying or the minimizing of a date axis. You can either do it for a value axis. So you can say what's the minimum and max value that you want in the range. And I could have applied those reference lines onto the actual Human Development Index value pill. So again, I'm just going to undo that. So that's a really, for me, that's quite a nice way of being able to automate. So if you were wanting that technique in a business environment, most of your dashboards would be interactive. So you would need to consider not fixing the points, but if you do it via reference lines, you overcome that. So again, if we talk about the before and after when it comes to minimizing axes, the option on the left, on the top, is where we've got just the most of the Tableau default set. So you've got the 0.1 interval on the Human Development Index, you've got the 2-year intervals on the year, and you've got the grid lines showing. The one on the bottom is actually just stating the start of the data is 2000, the end of the data is 2018, and I personally didn't need to know the gaps in between. And on the left-hand side, you've got 0 to 1. And remember, that's done on the bottom via the dynamic reference lines. And of course, you can turn the tooltips off. So when someone hovers over the line, I've just deliberately done it here. So if I hover over 2018, you see nothing. If you don't turn the tooltips off, you get a fairly meaningless minimal min year equals 2000. So do remember to turn the tooltips off so it's easier for your end users to engage with. So what I'm going to get onto next is we start to move into indexing. So how do you create custom labeling and ordering? So in my IronViz feeder viz, I wanted to show the Human Development Index of every single country within the region that they sit, and I wanted to order them. So if you just do that via a couple of rows, so you log region onto, I'm just going to go into the sheet. So if we log region into the rows and we put the ISO 3-digit country code into the rows, what you will notice is because I've got 189 columns or 189 rows in here, you've got to scroll down. So it's still easy to engage with, and you still get the concept of Europe's got the highest Human Development Index across its countries. You've got to scroll down across it. So you're forcing the user to do more to engage with the chart because they've got to scroll. So the one of the things I would encourage is to use an index trick. So now we start to get into some table calculations. So what you'll notice here is I've started to create a table whereby regions across the top, so they're in columns, and countries are still in rows. So if I go into here, what you'll notice is, so I've got just the standard region converting it into uppercase on the columns, but this time I've put index as a calculation in rows. Now it's really important to remember what you want to show in your chart. So I've deliberately got country and I've got the 3-digit code because at some point in the next couple of minutes, I'm going to show you how to put that on a label. So the country is on detail and the 3-digit row is on text. So all I do for the index is just literally, you could create the formula, but in this instance, I just typed in. And then when you go into the edit table count, you want to make sure that what you want to restart by is at the top of your specific dimensions. So put region name at the top and then put country and the 3-digit ISO code into the specific dimensions underneath. And what you're effectively forcing Tableau to do is render those columns as individual rows, but within the individual columns of your region. So you're not creating, I'm just going to try, and I might regret doing this, I'm just going to put in country into there. So if you didn't use index, you see Tableau then has to render every single country. But if you use index, it still renders every country, but it does it within the individual column. So it's a really nice way of dynamically being able to show effectively rows and columns, but without having to plot each individual country as a row across every region, knowing that it's not applicable across every region. So that's one step, but you've then got the issue of how do you know which countries relate to which bar? So all of a sudden, we've actually made it easier to digest because there's more on screen, there's less scrolling, but you're then making it more difficult for users because they then have to scroll over each one of these points to be able to identify the country. Well, what you can now do is a dual axes technique. So you can actually get Tableau to plot the 3-digit country code alongside each region. So again, if we go into this sheet, what you'll see up here is I'm no longer just looking at the metric to view. I'm now starting to also look at what I've called max minus 0.2. Now you might wonder why I put max minus 0.2. Well, remember the bar is between 0 and 1. So by doing max of minus 0.2, what I'm effectively doing is creating this additional mark, which is at the value of 0.2. So in other words, it's before the start of the bar. And then all I'm doing is dropping the 3-digit code onto text. So then what that creates is a dual axis chart where the bar is the main focus, but the secondary axis, so the secondary point being rendered, is just a text marked card with 3-digit code on it. So then what you're able to do is combine the nice trick of being able to put countries into their regions across, and then you can still label the individual rows by their country. So you're making it accessible for the end user. They don't have to scroll over everything. But one of the things and you're starting to get a little bit of a mindset in terms of my personality and probably what my guys at work absolutely hate in terms of the pixel perfect nature of what I like my visits to be. So what you'll notice in this instance is, yeah, it's great that you can show the region and the countries, but if you start to look across, down here, we're actually cutting off half of the bottom bar on the chart because we've got a scroll bar. So the last thing I would encourage you to do is use padding to be able, or you could change the size of the sheet, but personally I find it easier to use padding because you can then do it one at a time. So what I mean by padding is click on the sheet, go layout, and then you've got this outer padding and inner padding. Now I use this loads within our workplace business dashboards because most of our dashboards are tiled. But this is floating, but what you'll notice is I've put an inner padding of 10 on the bottom element of the chart. So if I remove that, you'll see again, you've got the cutoff of the last bar. By making an inner padding of 10, you're nicely then on the default view, meaning that no countries are cut off in your chart. So again, it's not going to massively transform the insights, but from an end user perspective, they don't have to look at it and see a half cut off country on the bottom of the chart. So again, if we look at the design techniques, the before is the top chart. Nothing wrong with it. I think it's relatively easy to use, but you've got to scroll an awful long way and you don't get the concept of being able to compare regions that easily. On the bottom chart, you still get the scroll bar, but you've got the region showing across. So you can see the top, probably not going to be able to count it instantly, but the top 12 or so countries in every region, you can see that all of Europe's are yellows. All of Africa's are grey or blues. Now, in reality, in the Viz, that was about quartiles of where the Human Development Index is. So it becomes very easy to see Europe's actually got quite a large number of highly developed countries. And then when you scroll down, you can start to see the visual flow of the data through the use of colour to see where the discrepancies are. And the very last technique I'm going to show you is how to stylize scatters. So this is something, this was probably the element of my IronViz feeder viz that I was most proud of, because I really went to town on customizing my scatter. So what you see here, the default scatter, there's absolutely nothing wrong with it. In my opinion, you could show that, it would be insightful, but I do think there's some things you can do to be able to add value. So in this instance, just to put it into context, the column, so the x-axis is between 0 and 1, that's the Human Development Index. The 0 to 10 is the Democracy Index of countries. So the first thing I did was labeling individual sectors. So I wanted to label what in reality 0, 2, 4, 6, 8 and 10 related to when it came to the Democracy Index. And the way that I did that, I'm going to sound like a bit of a crack record, it was via reference lines. And you might wonder, well, how did I get the full democracies to be a tableau bold colour and then the democracy index value underneath, or the range of the score, to be lowercase and less intense? in reality, what that is 2 reference lines. So that I've put a reference line up on 10, and I've then given it, so I've put it as a 10 value, as a constant, and I've then given it a custom label of full democracies. And then on the formatting of that line, I've just moved the alignment of the text to be under the line. So that's the first label. But then democracy index 8 to 10 is a secondary reference line. So that's set at 9.7. So I wanted it to be directly underneath the full democracies. And then I've put a custom label on again of what the range was. And no surprises on the formatting. I've set it under it, but this time I didn't want the line to show. So I set the line to be none so that the line didn't show. So in reality, it's a complete kind of bit of shall I say, style over substance or wizardry to try and give Tableau the illusion that you're putting labels on, but all you're effectively doing is plotting reference lines and then formatting the reference line label to give the end user the illusion of sectors within your scatter plot. So if you go back to the overall look of this, what you're then allowing a user to do is see that there's a sector of 8 to 10, which The Economist, as the newspaper that did the democracy index, identified as full democracies. You can then identify the sector 6 to 8, 4 to 6, and less than 4. So it is still a scatter diagram, but I've overlaid labeling and lines to add value in terms of how a user interacts with it and the insights they gain with it. I didn't have, you could have done that via legends to the left-hand side or text above, but I wanted to reduce the ink on the page, so by embedding it into the scatter, you are embedding it into what the user's looking at and hopefully making it easier for them to digest. So the next point I'm going to say, I'll hold my breath slightly when I say it, pie charts. So I'm not going mad, I'm not pretending that you have to do pie charts, and I'm never advocating for pie charts. But there is just something that I wanted to share with you in Tableau, which is a nice little technique, which I stumbled across by accident at work one day when Alex Jones showed it to me. So the left-hand side one, the original chart, uses the circle marks card. But if you change that to pie, and I'm going to do it instantly on here, I personally think the pie adds a clarity around the lines. And it's only really small, but and I think it's because of the way Tableau renders, the circle is a shape, whereas the pie is in theory a polygon that Tableau is prompting. I might be wrong on that, but I think that's what it is. So again, if you go back to circle, it may not come through great on the WebEx, but you just get a slight greater clarity for the end user when you set it to pie. So just something really small, but if you are doing scatter plots, personally, I would set your marks cards to pies so that you are able to get the absolute pixel clarity of those circles showing up. And then the last thing I did on my scatter plot is I actually made them two-tone points. And this idea was inspired by Sam Parsons. So if you go into the scatter plot, all this is adding an additional axis for the measure. So I'm just going to drop that off for now. So that's the original that we saw. That's just one color, traditional scatter plot. But by putting a dual axis, what I can then do is reduce the size of the second plot, or the second point, to be smaller than the first point, and then make the second point slightly lighter in color. So what you're then doing the illusion of is you've still got a point, but I'm almost creating a darker band around it, but the darker band isn't a set color of black or white like a traditional scatter point would be. You can make it, if you look here on the right hand side, you'll see I've got two different color points, and the yellow on the top quartile on the outer is deeper than the yellow on the middle one. So it's just, again, an easy way of being able to add some depth to the scatter plot, not particularly adding any insights, but personally, I find it more engaging to have that level of depth, and it makes each individual point stand out because you've then got the two-tone within the individual point. And all that is using dual axes. So again, if I just compare the before and after, and I apologise, I just had to squish these up a bit so they're not square scatters, which would bug the hell out of me, if I'm honest, in terms of if I was presenting it as an actual finished product. But the left-hand side is the original. That's where I didn't have the labelling, I didn't have it as a pi marks point, and I didn't have the two-tone points. The one on the right-hand side has the labelling that uses reference lines. It has the marks card set to pi, so it's a little bit crisper, and it has the two-tone points so that you are distinguishing, in my opinion, the individual points using a secondary colour just to make it a little bit easier for people to be able to engage with. So that brings me to the end of the tips and tricks. As I said, I will be uploading it to my Tableau public profile, and I will be making it downloadable so that if you did want to reverse engineer any of the techniques that I've shared with you today, you're more than welcome to go on, and I would encourage you to do so. I think Andy Cotgrave says it best, steal like an artist. So if someone's done it before you and they're willing to share, make the most of it, download it and use it for yourself. But a massive thank you for joining me today. If you do want to get in touch, my Twitter handle is on screen now, as is my blog. And thank you, Sagar, for sharing my Tableau public profile in the chat. You're more than welcome to go on it and A, download my feeder viz, and secondly, if you want to, download this individual workbook.
Perfect. Thank you, Simon. Thank you for sharing all the tips and tricks. I think there were some great advice and feedback from you. So if you have any questions for Simon, just go ahead and put in the Q&A tab. Happy to go ahead and answer. Ask for you.
So apologise if I get your name wrong, Hemant, but Hemant asked, is it possible to show dynamic legends in the chart? Yes, it is. And it was actually, the irony is, I did consider showing that today, but I actually ran out of time in terms of the presentation. So if you go on to my IronViz feeder viz on Tableau Public, you will be able to see that above the scatter plot, and I will quickly try and show it to you now actually. So if I quickly load up the actual viz, I'm just going to very quickly show it on screen, so hopefully it should show up. Sagar, can you just confirm you can still see my secondary Tableau window now?
Yeah, it's just loading. It's just loading, Simon.
Brilliant, thank you. So it'll literally take 10 seconds, but I just wanted to show you an example of a dynamic legend in the chart. And of course, it's a little bit brave doing this live, but hopefully it'll work. So if I scroll down just above the individual scatter, it's not quite a legend, but I've used the individual circles as a way of being able to highlight the individual regions. Now, all that is a sheet that is processing the region naming columns, and then I'm putting marks and then labeling the marks. So if you wanted to do dynamic legends, I would encourage you to do it as a sheet, and then you can format those legends as you wish to. Sagar, I don't see any other questions coming through, so I think that was it in terms of the Q&A tab.
Sure, I am just seeing that. There is a general question, Simon, and this is something which comes to everyone, is when can you say that you have passed a beginner level in Tableau?
So sorry, Sagar, what was that? When can you say you are?
So the question is that Wei is asking when you can say that you have passed a beginner level in Tableau.
So a particular level in terms of your skill or kind of your expertise?
That's right, yeah.
So I would answer that twofold. One is I would say don't judge yourself against others. So your journey is personal to you. So yes, there is obviously one of the obvious ways of saying have you reached a certain level in Tableau is do certification. So Tableau offer 3 levels of certification: specialist, certified associate, and certified professional. And they are ways of you actually quantifying. You've taken a test, you've assessed yourself to say you've gone through a level, and you get recognition from Tableau through a certification directory. And it really, if you're looking to justify your or quantify your level of experience or skill in Tableau for professional purposes, i.e. interviewing, it can be a great way to be able to give a potential employer evidence you've done it. But if you wanted to just demonstrate your personal level in Tableau, I would say there are 2 community initiatives that I would encourage you to do more than anything else: Makeover Monday and Workout Wednesday. Workout Wednesday, if you've got Workout Wednesdays on your Tableau public account, it will evidence to people that you understand how Tableau works, not just that you're a great designer. And Makeover Monday evidences that you understand design best practices, and people will be able to see your progression in your designs. But I would absolutely, please don't ever try and compare yourself against anyone else, because everyone brings something to the community. We're richer for us all being together. So don't think of it as a competition. Think about it about what resonates with you, what you enjoy, and explore the path that works for you.
Thank you, Simon. And Simon, one thing which I had also seen of the brain dates you have put in DC, I think you are inspiring everyone how they can go ahead and start a career in JLL, right? What are the things they need to go ahead and work in JLL? Do you want to give advice to everyone in the community, like how if someone is trying to start their career with respect to Tableau, what are some of the things they should keep in mind?
Yep, I would love to, and thank you for asking, Sagar, because it's one of the things that is really passionate to me, and it's one of the things it makes me come to work is my people. So when we look for people to employ, we don't look for Tableau skills. So we don't say, can you use Tableau? We can teach people Tableau. Anyone can learn Tableau. It's a fantastic product. It's easy to use. The community inspire you. What we do look for is a Tableau public profile. And the reason that we do that is that suggests to us that you live and breathe learning and collaboration. You're willing to put yourself out there and demonstrate what you do. So Tableau public profile is one of the things we look for. The other thing that we recruit for are values and behaviours. We want people that live and breathe the values that we live and breathe at work every day. So by that I mean collaboration, giving feedback, innovation, and learning. We don't want to be seen as, we're IT, we know best. So when we do look to recruit people, the Tableau public profile is an indication that people live and breathe that value. But then what we actually do is we give you really simple tests and we ask you to present back to us a story. So we're not trying to assess your Tableau skills. What we're trying to assess is, can you present back to us in a way that engages with us and shows empathy with us as a user? So I would really encourage anyone looking to progress their career using Tableau as a tool, embrace the community, use Tableau public, but focus on storytelling. Focus on your ability to tell stories with data, because that's what will stand you out from the crowd.
Thank you, Simon. And in our last session, we had Francisco, and he talked about his whole journey, how he was able to get a job in JLL through the, I think, inspiration and motivation from the Tableau community. And I think the great feedback from you, which he got on his business. So, yeah, thank you for that.
My pleasure.
So, we have one question from Fred over here. So, Fred is asking, can you please talk about the carousel selector and button to switch between regions?
So the one that I just showed on screen, I think I've just closed. Bear with us 2 seconds. So Freddie, I'm assuming that was based on my original Iron Viz feeder, I think. So bear with me 2 seconds, and I'll just load it up again. So So I apologise, everyone. I won't sing any hold music because that's certainly not going to appeal to people whilst we wait. So I think what Fred was referring to is in my original IronViz feeder. As we scroll down, we've got a button, or the appearance of a button here, where you can flick between regions to be able to change the region. So you can scroll between Asia, then you can scroll, you can scroll to Asia, then you can scroll to the Americas, then you can scroll to Europe, and then it hides because there is no other region to explore beyond Europe. Then you explore Americas and you can go all the way back again. Now these, and I apologise, Fred, if this isn't what you're referring to, but these are basically just individual sheets that leverage a technique that Kevin shared in terms of parameter buttons. So all you're doing is using these buttons to change a parameter, and the parameter then forces through which region you want to see in the charts. So I probably can't go into it in enough depth to do it justice, but if you do want to open up the Viz, it's on Tableau Public, it's available to download, but fundamentally it's using parameter actions to then drive through, and the parameter then changes so that if the parameter is Europe, the right-hand chart, just quickly to demonstrate how it does the hide, what you'll see is there's a filter on it where the forward parameter is true. So as soon as you reach Europe, the forward parameter goes to false, and then it hides the arrows so that you can't do anything further. So that's the way that you dynamically be able to render it.
Perfect. Thank you. I think we can take the last question from Pallav. So he is asking, where should padding be used and what is an ideal value while using padding?
So I would encourage padding to be used to create white space. It creates, so if you can imagine, you've got a 2x2 grid of charts. If your chart goes all the way up to the edge of the white space for that chart, you're not giving it any room to breathe. So in JLL, we've got Viz standards and we apply padding to our charts. So if you go onto JLL's Tableau Public, we've got a corporate Tableau Public page. So just type JLL in and look at the global KPI dashboard example. You can't download it because it's intellectual property of us, but we have allowed people to view it using sanitized data. And what you'll see there is we've got white sectors for every chart, but the charts never hit the edge of the white. And the values that we've chosen are an inner padding of 10. And we put 10 all the way around it, the left, the bottom, the right, and the top. Now, I would say that is just personal, professional choice that Fee Gordon and myself decided on. But we fundamentally believe a padding of 10 around all the edge of it gives you sufficient white space to mean it is very easy for people to digest and interact with. So my personal advice on that would be a value all the way around of 10. Now, just to put a slight flavour on that, if you've got two charts next to each other, you can then use padding very cleverly to say that the padding on the left edge of one of them, or the right edge of one of them, is 5, and the padding on the left edge of the other one is 5. So when you add the two padding together, you still get that illusion of a gap of 10 between both charts. So that's quite a nice technique you can use, that when you've got two charts next to each other, instead of making it 10, 10, 10, and 10 on both, you would then have a gap of 20 in the middle, make it 10, 10, 10, and 5, and then you will add up to 10 in the middle.
Perfect. Thank you, Simon. Simon, any final words from you? Any advice, any motivation for in the community which you just want to mention?
Yeah, I would just say jump in. So I remember when I started 5 years ago, I had no idea of the Tableau community. I didn't have a Tableau public profile. It took me about 12 to 18 months to get one. Please don't ever be ashamed of your skills. I would encourage you, don't make Vizes invisible. Don't hide them. Show your progression. We all started somewhere. And that's why whether you're a Zen, an ambassador, or starting today, if you look at all of our Tableau public profiles, most people keep all of their Vizes on there to show their progression. And be proud of your journey, be proud of your partner community because we all want each other to succeed.
Thank you, Simon. I think that there were some great words. Don't make your Viz invisible and don't be ashamed of that. So, with that, thank you, Simon. It was an honor to have you on VizConnect. And thank you, everyone, for joining. I will go ahead and publish this great video on our YouTube profile. And I hope you will go ahead and apply all the tips and tricks and the best practices shared by Simon on your dashboard and let us know what is your feedback about them. So, with that, thank you, Simon. Have a great weekend ahead. Take care and be safe. Bye bye. Thank you.
Thanks, everyone.